of you that follow policy or human rights situations oftentimes, as Jay mentioned, get jaded with numbers. You know, oh, another torture story, this other atrocity happened here. Oh, it's only 500,000, not 1 million. And it's very easy for us to write off bad things because we just assume bad things are things that happen over there, and many times they don't necessarily affect us. And also the challenge with North Korea in particular is that things are so bad on such a scale and scope that it sounds fake. It sounds like it's a lie. It just sounds ridiculous, or it sounds unfathomable. It's impossible to really comprehend. But North Korea is all the things the panelists have talked about and more. And if we wanted to really go down the list and just even bullet point the number of human rights violations and bad things that are happening in that state, we would be here for hours. And that's always been a challenge that those of us who choose to speak about North Korea have had when trying to articulate what the circumstances are like there. But I'll just point out just a few things just so we can have the framework of what's going on. Melanie's book does a great job of painting the story of the Underground Road and the things people face and the risks they take to get out of that situation. I mean, it's a very real situation where they decide whether to put their life in their own hands to try to escape. You know, when I first met Joseph, he was very young, and I guess we may wonder whether he was fully aware of the decision he was making in order to leave, but the fact is, if you decide to leave a shelter in China to try to seek freedom elsewhere, regardless of what country you're trying to get to, you're very well aware that you could be caught on the way and or tortured and or killed. So in order to drive somebody to go through that much risk, whatever you're escaping from back home has to be pretty bad, extraordinarily bad, far worse than whatever you're facing in order to get out of that place. So North Korea is that thing. It is that bad. At least 1 million, if not 2 million North Koreans starved to death in the mid-1990s when the government had access to food and was able to feed its own people and did not. The North Korean government has treated its own people not like any other modern state would. It's not there in order to facilitate the well-being of its people. It's there to facilitate the well-being of about 2,000 or 3,000 elites, in particular one family with the last name Kim. Right now, about 6 or 7 million North Koreans are on starvation level in terms of nutrition. I mean, every year, regularly, like clockwork, the World Food Program and the UN issues emergency calls saying millions of North Koreans are about to die, that they need emergency aid. And yet North Korea continues to spend up to $3-4 billion on nuclear tests and missile tests when its people are starving. I mean, that by itself shows you the priorities of the country. And then you get into the mass human rights violations in terms of you get arrested if you listen to a pop song. There are people that got arrested because they put a cup of water so that the condensation ring covered the deer leader's face. There are others that have been tortured because a relative of theirs, escaped the country to get food and housing. When I was in Chinese hospitality in 2006, they had the actual head of that prison was ethnically Korean. And there's a lot of ethnic Koreans in that region, and I happen to speak Korean. So we talked quite a bit. Nothing subversive. He's not going to get in trouble. But one thing he shared with me was that they get North Koreans all the time in that prison, that on Mondays and Thursdays they get sent back to North Korea, almost like it's like milk day or trash day. It's just a normal thing. That's the day they send North Koreans back from China to North Korea. And he told me that the young boys in particular would always beg him. They would call him Hyung, which is like older brother in Korean, kind of an informal phrase. They would beg him and say, "Can you cut my hair?" And he realized that the reason they asked for that is because North Korea has rules about how long and what styles your hair has to be for males and females. And if your hair is in a different style or longer in length, that means you've been out of the country. Not only out of the country, but out of the country for a long period of time. So if the hair is cut, the kids had a shot at saying, going back and, oh, I got lost, or I was there for a day, I tried to get some food or work, quickly, I wasn't there for 6 months or a year or two. Everybody involved in any way on North Korea knows what's happening. There's no illusion as to how bad the regime is. The illusion is in the sense that we can't solve it. The delusion is that we think that this is an inevitable crisis that cannot be fixed, that we have no right to do anything, or that we have no ability to do anything about it. I think that North Korea is not just an issue for human rights. I mean, this place is almost this black hole in modern civilization. By any measure, regardless if you have some connection to Korea or not, it's a huge problem, not just for human rights, for proliferation, for WMD, biological, chemical, nuclear weapons, conventional weapons, counterfeiting, state-sponsored terrorism. I mean, it's astonishing that this is not a huge issue, not just in general, but in the presidential election when you have a nuclear-armed state surrounded by OECD countries, half of which are strong American allies. This is a big deal that we just kind of keep pushing under the rug and kicking the can down the road. I think that there will be a day when North Korea is free, It may be 100 years from now, or maybe 10 years from now, but that day will come, and I think most of us involved in various governments or policy positions will realize that there could have been much more we could have done, and that the circumstances were worse than we had anticipated. This is very different than the Holocaust in one very important measure. It's that we have documentable, verifiable, overwhelming evidence that anybody can access. There was evidence during the Holocaust that policymakers had access to and did not choose to act on, and they could have. And many people will say, if I was in that position back then, I would have acted differently. Well, today, everybody watching this online later on or on C-SPAN or in the room can go home and Google or Bing or whatever you'd like, and you can find concentration camps. Joseph sat there on Google and showed me the route he took to walk from home to school every day. The fact that he can do that in 2012 means that we have overwhelming evidence of what is happening, and there's really no excuse anymore in terms of ignorance. You know, I think when you look at Korea and what the Republic of Korea has accomplished in the last 60 years, the Korean people and the Korean soul, when it's unchained, can do extraordinary things. It went from one of the most impoverished countries in the world to the 10th largest economy in the world in 60 years. It's incredible. Look at what Joseph has accomplished. Look what Korean Americans have accomplished here in America. North Korea is the part of Korea that never got that freedom. The first half of the 20th century is old news for everybody that's in South Korea or the United States. But for North Koreans, they're still stuck in that place. And I think that we have a special responsibility to try to fix it. I remember when Joseph first came to the United States after a few months being in China, and we took him to a grocery store. I mean, these are the things you don't think about, but we took him to a grocery store just to buy like snacks. And I don't know if he remembers this, but his jaw dropped when we got to the aisles, just rows and rows of yogurt and cereal, like 50 types of each one. I mean, it's amazing how much we have here. He had his first strawberries, and to explain what a strawberry is and watch him eat it was just an amazing experience. We took him to the zoo, and I had to they had a diorama of dinosaurs, and I had so much difficulty explaining to him what a dinosaur was when there's no context for a dinosaur. I mean, these are things that are just, you know, pleasant illustrations and anecdotes, but you take that kind of level of education and isolation from the outside world across the board with everything, and you can imagine a nation that's crippled, not to mention the impact of having generations that were malnourished. You have children, entire generations of children that are not just physically stunted in terms of their height, but they've had brain damage because they haven't had food properly for the first 5 years of their lives. So I think North Korea is not just a problem for Koreans, it's not just a problem for people interested in human rights, it's a problem for everybody. And many of the people here in this room or that are watching this have a special ability to weigh in on the fate of those people, whether it's now or later on. And I would share Jay's perspective on the prior impact of sanctions and other approaches that had measurable results with North Korea. We had regular feedback from our own sources in the country that those things were working extremely effectively, and we can get into that a little bit more during the question and answer session. But this is not a problem that will go away. At some point it will have a hard or soft landing. At some point those people will be free. And the question mark is how many people will need to die until we get to that point. And the more we do now, the more we preemptively prepare and act, the lower that number will be. Because there's no question at all that it will end some way, in a big way, and it will be the issue for everyone in the region, if not the world, to deal with at some point. So I'll just like to end by saying that you know, those of us that have the privilege of being born free or having earned our freedom or managed to somehow accidentally, you know, live in a free place have a special responsibility to help those that are still not there. And these people are literally the closest thing to just complete slaves in almost every sense. Even if they make it out to China, they get sexually trafficked, 70% of them. Even if they make it out to Mongolia or Burma, they're often detained, arrested, then sent back. I mean, we have stories about people having wire put through their noses or ears in order to have them sent back en masse. It's not something that, it's easy to get jaded, but it's just that bad. We can be here for hours, and I think that points to not only a special responsibility, but also it's just so precious, and we're so grateful that folks like Jay and Melanie have taken on this issue, because I can point out myself, I very likely would still be you know, in Chinese custody if folks like Melanie and Jay had not raised the alarm and continue to push on, even when many governments and other folks were pressuring them not to. So with that, I'd like to transition to questions, but I'd like to thank everybody to come out, and thank Melanie in particular for writing this extraordinary book.
Thank you both to Joseph and to Adrian.